Hi everyone, it's Naomi Sunderland joining you from the Sunshine Coast in Australia. I'm sitting outside on this beautiful warm winter's day, so you may get to hear, if we're lucky, some kookaburras singing in the background. Unfortunately, that also means you may hear a little bit of traffic noise, but I hope you can bear with me because I was hoping that we would have our kookaburra friends join us. I'm sitting on beautiful Gubbi Gubbi or Kabi Kabi land. I want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land. They're caring for country over millennia, and which has allowed country in turn to care for us. I acknowledge elders past, present and emerging on this country, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded in this country and the broader nation of Australia. So thanks for having me, everyone. Really great to be here. Today I'm going to be presenting on behalf of my colleague Phil Graham and myself on a pilot project we've been running over the last 2 years called Songs of Self-Determination. The project has involved a series of in-depth interviews and yarns with leading musicians from across Australia and our neighbour sister nation, Vanuatu. We've talked to musicians particularly around this theme of self-determination, which when we entered the project, we were really interested in talking about self-determination as it's described in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So we're talking about a collective form of self-determination when we're referring to it as a human right in that declaration. And it refers to self-determining governance, in local areas, governance and self-regulation, I guess, cultural expression, education, a whole raft of different areas in which, through that charter, First Nations peoples acknowledge and claim their right to determine their own sovereign lands and communities in the way that is culturally congruent and culturally meaningful to them. And also, interestingly and significantly, they claim the right to self-determine the degree to which they participate or not in dominant colonial institutions and systems and society. So if you haven't had a look at that declaration, have a look. It is very powerful and represents decades of work from grassroots activists in First Nations communities from across the world. Today, we're just talking about how that idea of self-determination links to music making in First Nations contexts. And here you'll see pictured several of the people that we interviewed, as well as people who facilitated our connections, our relationships with First Nations musicians across Vanuatu and Australia. You'll see in the top row there, that man with the fantastic Aboriginal flag on his t-shirt is Uncle Joe Geyer. He has been a senior advisor and artistic elder on our project. And also, if you look just to the right of him, there's a row of 5 people. The man with the blue jumper and the red pants is Uncle Bunna Laurie, and he's also been a senior advisor and artistic elder for our work. The pilot project is really preparing us, or prepared us, to apply for a national competitive grant, which we submitted at the start of this year. We're really hoping will be successful, but you never know with these things, which Teoti and our colleague Cleisela Harrison from Finland have graciously agreed to be on the advisory group for, as well as international members. So hoping that one comes off. But for now, we just want to tell you some of the themes that emerged across Vanuatu and Australia in terms of, asking musicians, First Nations musicians, why do you play music? What meaning does it have for you, for other musicians, and for your families, for communities? So you can see here, in the interests of presenting a big snapshot fairly quickly in this online forum, we've just mapped some of the themes that came out of our yarns with First Nations musicians across Vanuatu and Australia in terms of the impacts that it might have at that macro level, which is kind of society-wide impacts, at the meso level, which is your community level impacts, and the micro, which is impacts on individuals. And you can see there we did have quite a spread, but if you look, there really is a great presence of themes that relate to that macro upstream level. So when we asked First Nation musicians, why do you make music? We really wanted to also explore the ideas of how self-determination can be both a collective and an individual right. And that has been some of the criticism of these mainstream approaches to human rights in the past, is that they have been very Eurocentric in their cultural positioning of rights as being belonging to an individual rather than a broader collective. So obviously when we're talking about First Nations communities, cultures, governance, ways of being, then we really need to move to a space where we are acknowledging collective rights for the betterment of entire communities, rather than just looking at that individualist way of understanding ourselves and our communities. So here we sort of crossed both of those by mapping things from the macro to the meso to the micro in terms of outcomes that musicians spoke about. So we've got things like preserving their natural environment. Uncle Bunna, if you don't know him yet, please follow him on Facebook. He's an outstanding international activist for environmental preservation. He's a whale dreamer, a culture bearer from the Mirning tribe in South Australia. His work is just, has evolved over many decades as a really prominent musician and songwriter in the band Coloured Stone. And he's very active and well known now, senior elder in terms of advocating for environmental preservation, in particular in oceans, so salt water. And then we've also got, we've heard stories from Vanuatu about brothers and sisters in Vanuatu, musicians advocating for their colleagues and reaching out to other First Nations people in West Papua. And they thought that, we've achieved independence here in Vanuatu. We really want to support other First Nations communities in their self-advocacy. Through our own music, we lend our voices to support other communities overseas in terms of their self-advocacy for their own human rights. So that was a really outstanding example that came out of the yarns as well. And people like Joe Geyer, Uncle Joe Geyer, have been, really active musicians, leading Australian musicians, talked about decades past where it was such a hard slog to find any public forum to talk about Aboriginal social justice issues or well-being. And he talked about music as a way to speak when no other ways were possible. And also, several of the people we interviewed talked about music as a form of soft entry advocacy, as a way of educating non-Indigenous peoples and fighting exploitation. A key example of that theme around fighting exploitation was senior women in Vanuatu at the Leeuwarton Cultural Village. Engaged Phil and I in one of our recent trips to collaboratively write a song about respecting culture when visitors, in particular film crews, who often want to come in and film this amazing visual and audio image of the Leeuwarton water music ladies performing in the water, either the ocean or a pool in their cultural village. They were really encountering some significant IP issues about their own cultural content, and they're basically been taken back to other countries in the form of film and documentary. So one of the senior women there, Cecilia, wanted to introduce a song that she could sing as protocol, as a way of enforcing local cultural law. When people set foot into the village, she will sing the song and communicate to them what the expectations are in terms of respecting culture and respecting the culture bearers in that area. Also, documenting really significant events is a major form of songwriting in Vanuatu. For example, Tropical Cyclone Harold and our colleagues there have reached out to us really recently to join them in co-writing a song about the impacts of Tropical Cyclone Harold on Espiritu Santo, which is one of the biggest islands in Vanuatu. Then just quickly, I wanted to touch and finish on some of the micro individual level outcomes that musicians spoke about. They really quite often talked about music as medicine for themselves, for their families, and then communities. So in that way, you can see it sort of spreading from the individual micro level to up to the meso, but also these really very powerful notions of spirituality and individual levels of well-being, of using music as a form of expression, as a form of communication, and importantly, a phrase, a really powerful phrase that one interviewee talked about was getting things out of my gut, and that real embodied, manifestation of music making. So that's all I can talk about briefly. I hope it's given you a bit of an overview of some of the yarns that we had and some of the things people talked about across diverse settings, but there really were some of the common themes across both of these really diverse settings. So great to see that emerging. I can't wait to hear other people's papers and talk to you more about this research. Thank you so much.